So basically 2 weeks ago, we kind of went into Cordage, but we went into a whole lot of Dyneema related conversations. And as I was kind of listening to what was taking place, I'm like, we're really not answering Annette's question as it relates
Right.
to, pardon?
I said, right, yeah.
Ah,
I came away with the same impression.
yep, as it relates to this different cordage and how you pick what you need. And I talked to Eric about it afterwards, and he was saying he kind of agreed and had some ideas about what to do differently. So, Eric, you want to go ahead and take it away?
Well, Annette, my thought was that we really didn't talk about the different fibers and the different construction of rope and the different brands that are available and where to get them. Is that more of what you wanted to hear?
Yes, and kind of what you know, what to use for what purpose.
Well, a lot of that is subjective. There's a lot of personal preference involved, and there's a lot of trouble in actually finding what it is you want to get. So one of the things I found after the meeting before was this PDF from Samson Rope, which I can send out a link to if people are interested in reading about this stuff later. And so I just wanted to talk about, first off, the different types of rope construction. And on the left, they have several options here, including twisted rope, a single braid rope that can be either hollow or solid.
So, Eric, can you point at what you're talking about?
Hang on just a moment. Oopsie. Well, let's try over here. Okay.
That works.
So you have twisted rope, which usually is 3 strands, but sometimes is 4. You've got single braids, which could be bundles of it's just one strand of braided line of either 8 or 12 strands usually. Or what's called plaited rope. We don't normally see a lot of that. But most of what we see is double braid. And that will be either a traditional double braid where the cover and the core share the load equally. And let me just switch to the overhead and I'll show you some examples. So this, of course, is 3-strand twisted line.
And why do you say it is, of course, 3-strand twisted?
Well, you can see from the construction that it's twisted line composed of 3 separate strands twisted together. Now, you normally don't see a lot of this on boats anymore, except for dock lines and anchor lines.
There you go. So tell us what you use it for.
What was that?
I said, Eric, as you go through this and you show us each of the lines, tell us what you use them for today.
Okay, well, this is, I guess I'm going to have to digress a little bit. This is spun polyester rope. The material is a spun polyester fiber. It's nice and soft, and it's pretty firm. And because of the construction, it's a little bit stretchy. And this is, I use when making sails. I'll use this as bolt rope on a sail. Now, normally in sailing, you would only, on
I'm sorry, you said
modern
it was what?
boats,
The bolt rope, so the rope that feeds up the mast in the mainsail, or if you've got a footed main, the rope goes into the boom, that's the line that we sew into the sail, the bolt rope.
Oh, okay.
But Eric
but
also
normally,
said use it for anchor lines or what else?
well, it's common to see twisted rope used for anchor lines and for dock lines, but that would typically be nylon.
Eric, so does this stuff have a problem with shrinkage then?
Stretch.
Well, I've had sails with bolt ropes that have shrunk and really screwed up my mast where I had to cut them out, cut them loose at the bottom.
When we assemble a sail, we put load on the bolt rope, and we're supposed to put a certain amount of load on the bolt rope. And I don't know if they put too much on, because John, we've had a couple of sails that way as well. It may be that they put too much load when they stretched the rope.
Well,
So the rope didn't actually shrink, it just returned to normal then.
And it snuck back up into the sail. It happens
actually, I
on
think
boat ropes that are older sails.
it's a combination of factors. One is that twisted line has a significant, what's called constructional elongation. That is, when you pull it tight, it gets narrower and longer. And then when you let up, it pulls back some and gets fatter and looser again. That's just the nature of anything that's twisted, is that as it untwists, it'll get longer, and as it twists, it'll get shorter. And so part of the change is after having been stretched for a while, it will, when relaxed over time, creep back to word creep, that's else. But it will
Eric,
naturally shorten up. What was that,
Can I
Ray?
interrupt? This is Ray. I have a question here. It's a naive question. So when you're making a sail, you put that line in or something like it as a bolt rope, would you ever stitch the line at the foot so that it wouldn't sneak back up into the bolt itself?
Yes, I sew it in at the head and the foot.
And he sews it
Good.
by hand as well,
That's
so that he can really sew it in well.
And so there's no consequence for doing that. It just acts like it was when the sails were made, I guess.
Well, I think to some extent, yes, the rope does shrink with age. A little bit.
So the consequence for
And also, and probably just as much, if not more, the sail fabric stretches. So it might be difficult to determine what's the actual cause, whether it's just the rope relaxing and getting naturally a little bit shorter, and the next time you pull on it, it'll get longer again, or the fibers actually shrinking with age, or the material stretching with age.
in my case, Eric, when I finally got the sail hoisted and in the cleat, the mast was bent. When it was stitched top and bottom. When I released the bottom stitches, it went up about 6 or 8 inches, and the mast was straight again.
Well,
But I digress, and I'm done with that subject. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's not get distracted into the vagaries of sail age. We're talking about where would you use twisted line. And normally, where we most often see twisted line is in anchor lines and dock lines. And they're normally made of nylon because nylon is stretchy, naturally stretchy. And by stretch, I mean elastic. And that's good for anchor lines and dock lines because when your boat moves around, it will take up some of the shock. Now you can get braided double braid nylon line and use it for dock lines and anchor lines, and it works great. And it's actually stronger than the same diameter of twisted line, but it's much more expensive. So if you are looking for a specific strength of line for your anchor line for your boat, it's cheaper to go to a larger diameter twisted line to get the strength you need rather than to buy a narrower diameter braided line. So that's why you'll still see a 3-strand twisted line for dock lines and anchor lines. It's just because it's less expensive than braided.
Eric, is the twisted nylon more apt to float as well?
No, nylon is heavier than water. It will sink no matter what shape it is.
Okay.
A good line to use for a trailer winch.
No. It's because it's stretchy and you don't want stretchy line. You don't want elastic for your winch. When you're winching a boat up onto your trailer, you want it to pull. You don't want the line to stretch. And I would also say that you do not want to use nylon for a tow rope.
Okay.
Now that seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Don't you think you would want a nice stretchy rope for a tow rope?
Right.
Well, you'd think you would, because, you know, that would take up some of the strain while your boat is being towed so that when the boat is towing you accelerates, it doesn't jerk you really hard. But the problem is, if you're towing a boat and you're using a nylon line and you start motoring and it gets under a lot of strain and the boat you're towing happens to be old and not in good repair and it rips the cleat out of the boat, if you're using nylon, it's like having it attached to a rubber band and it's going to fling that cleat right back at you. It's going to throw it into your boat or even past your boat, and it's a hazard if it hits somebody. So for tow ropes, you want to use a rope with very little stretch.
Makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions about twisted while we're here? If not, I'll slide it aside. And this is a line from New England. It's called Buzz Line. It's a single braid line. I think it's made out of Dacron. Let me see if I can get that to focus.
So by single braid, that means no core.
It has no core. If you open it up,
Now
open it up, you'll see that the only strands in it are the strands making up the rope itself. But it's very tightly braided. So it's pretty solid and it's fairly grippy. And this is a popular line for main sheets on small boats, on small dinghies.
So does it look like it's a 8 braid or a 12 braid?
Looks like an 8 to me, 8 strand.
So it's a single strand, even though it's got 8.
1, 2, 3. No, it's a 12 strand. All right, that's a
Okay.
12 strand braid. Now, this is rather unusual. You don't see a lot of single braids except as specialty ropes. Here's another example.
So Eric, don't
This-
move the lines around so much.
Okay, I'm not moving it.
We got to move it a little bit.
This is Maffioli, made by Maffioli. It's called Swift Cord. It's also a single braid, but unlike Buzzline, it's a very loose braid. It doesn't have a very stiff round shape. You can actually flatten it if you try, but it's nice and soft and easy on the hands. And it's actually made out of a combination of nylon and Dyneema. So the nylon provides bulk and softness, and the Dyneema provides strength and low stretch.
So Eric, you might use that for a main sheet if your blocks were big enough.
I bought this hank to use as a spinnaker sheet when I was planning to fit a spinnaker on the isotope.
So how thick is that? It looks like 5 to 8 millimeters, maybe 10.
I think this is an 8mm line,
It's pretty heavy.
which is about 5/16 of an inch, and it's kind of fat for that.
Yeah.
So isn't it
One of the
too
things that
fat?
I'm going to say again, and that was probably worth mentioning, is that you can't trust the manufacturer's measurements for diameter of line. Because what one manufacturer calls a 1/4 inch, another manufacturer will call 5/16.
But
In
Eric,
fact,
that
I
looks
bought 1/4 inch
too,
lines that were bigger than other 5/16 I've gotten.
Eric, that looks too big for a spinnaker line.
Well, I was going to run it through 57mm blocks.
And it'd be nice and
You
soft.
could
in
use it
your
for
hand
main
to
sheet
raise
too.
the-
It would be nice for a main sheet. But it's not cheap.
So the buzz line that you showed there, I use as a main sheet and jib sheet on the Buccaneer, and I think it's excellent.
Yeah, it's a relatively inexpensive line. It's pretty firm. It doesn't round corners very easily. It's a little stiffer, but it's knobbly. It's got texture to it, which makes it a little easier to grip.
Is there something that tells you, like if you're looking at a description, whether something is going to be kind of knobbly?
I can't say so. Okay, this is a double braid line, a conventional double braid, where if I pull the core out, you can see that the cover is braided and the core is braided too. And the cover and the core both share the load.
Is that a polyester cord?
This one is actually a polyester core with a polypropylene cover.
What is polypropylene?
It's another synthetic fiber. And normally you don't see a lot of polypropylene except in blends in ropes that you use on a boat. You know that horrible yellow 3-strand twisted line that you can get really cheap from Home Depot? That's really stiff and hurts your hand? You can all nod. That's polypropylene.
It's really slick too, isn't it?
It's really slick, and it's made out of coarse fibers. And if you try to grab it and pull, it'll burn your hand.
Yeah.
And it also tends to take a set and develop kinks. So it's really horrible stuff, and I hate to use it for just about any application. Its only real claim to fame is that polypropylene floats. It's lighter than water. So polypropylene gets a lot of use in ski boats for towing water skiers. So, and they like that because it won't get tangled in the ski boat. And it also has reasonably low stretch because you don't want a lot of stretch when you're water skiing.
That might be good for a tow rope.
So that line, Eric, is polypropylene. Why is it okay?
Well, let me zoom in more.
Better
Don't
yet,
know if you
what's
can
it
see
okay
it here.
for?
But this polypropylene cover is made out of very fine fibers. It's what they call multifilament polypropylene, or MFP line. And because the fibers are very small, they're a lot softer and easier to grip. So this is, a not bad for sheets. And this, in fact, is what we use for the jib sheet and the main sheet on the Tanzer.
And what diameter?
5/16. You may recognize the colors.
Yes.
For maroon and green for starboard and port jib sheets, and blue for the main sheet.
The
And
blue
it's,
looks like it's a larger diameter, but that's just visual, right? It's the same diameter?
because it's on top. Now which looks bigger?
So you're saying that this line for a main sheet would float. Let's say you're doing a downwind jibe and you've got lots of line out. The line would remain on the surface rather than sink and drag.
Well, it's a mix of polypropylene and polyester. The polypropylene is lighter than water, but the polyester is heavier. And also polyester has the habit of absorbing water.
Oh.
So it doesn't float?
So I wouldn't expect this to float.
That's too bad.
The upside is that this is less expensive than a polyester double braid. The polypropylene costs a little less.
What's this one called?
This is not a brand name line. This is just something that I picked up a few spools of. It's an MFP line, multifilament polypropylene cover over a polyester core.
MFP over a polyester coil.
Core. Now this is not what I use on the isotope because I have other line that I like the feel of better.
Who manufactures it?
This line?
Yes.
I think it was manufactured by a company called Valley Rope.
Valley Rope.
Valley, V-A-L-L-E-Y.
And they're still in business, right, Eric?
As far as I know. They mainly sell on eBay. Oh. This is the same stuff, just in 1/4 inch and different colors.
So this is multi-filament polypropylene with a polyester core.
Yes.
Smaller diameter.
This is just a smaller diameter.
And you would use these for?
Try to give you an idea of the difference in diameter. That's 1/4 inch diameter, and that's 5/16.
And what would you use the 1/4 inch
for 5/16, this is a little bit fat. I use the 1/4 inch for the halyards on the Tanzer, the main halyard and jib halyard, and also for the spinnaker sheets. So my jib halyard is made out of the blue, and the main halyard is made out of the brown. And the spinnaker sheets are also made out of the brown, except I've recored them with a Dyneema core.
Because it's lighter or stronger?
This core is really not good for tapering. It's a bit too loose a weave to taper well, because if you tried to bury the cover into the core, it would really show through. You'd have to open the braid up quite a bit. So as it is, it doesn't taper well. And I just want, for the spinnaker sheets, I wanted a very lightweight line on the end of my spinnaker sheets for most of what hangs off the end of the spinnaker. So I record it with 1/8" Dyneema and tapered it such that the majority of the line that's out flying outside the boat is the 1/8" Dyneema. And one of the advantages of Dyneema is it doesn't absorb water, and it actually floats. It's that light. And where you handle it and grab it and inside the boat and cleat it, it would have the cover over it. Okay. This is a hank of New England stay set, which is a traditional polyester double braid. This is true, it's polyester cover and polyester core, and the core and the cover share the load equally. I've melted that, so I really don't want to pull it apart. And this is probably the most popular yacht braid there is. If you go to West Marine and want to buy line off the spool, stay set is what they'll have.
You said New England stay set.
It's made by New England lines, or New England ropes.
And yacht line as in what things on a yacht?
Well, yacht braid is sort of a generic term for double braid polyester that's intended for sailing. There are a number of different companies that make what they call a yacht braid. New England makes it and they call it stay set. Samson makes a very similar line. I don't have a piece of it right here. It's called XLS for extra low stretch. That's the version the same.
Eric, you cut out when you said what it was called. You want to say it again?
The Samson version of stay set is called XLS for extra low stretch. So you go.
It's often used on big boats for sheets.
Yes, this is a very popular line on keel boats for jib sheets and main sheets and other control lines. And it comes in a variety of diameters. This is 5/16. This is 1/4 inch.
Eric, you want to tell us what the coloring things are called? You use them when you talk to me. You say they're flex or they're specs. What are they called?
And both stay set and XLS come in a variety of colors, either solid colors with white flecks or with a colored fleck. And stay set has a distinctive fleck pattern. That's 2 large ones and 1 little one. 1 little red one. The little one is always red on stay set. So this is white with red fleck. This is white with green fleck. And this is green with white fleck.
And those are all New England stay sets?
These are all stay set.
New England stay set?
Made by New England rope.
And they all have the little red fleck.
You notice they all have 1 small red fleck in them.
Is New England the only company that does that kind of thing, or are there other manufacturers who do something similar?
Other manufacturers have their own fleck patterns. Samson, for example, in their fleck, they always have one green strand and 1 red strand. in their lines. So you can look at it and say, oh, also for here example, this is not XLS, but you can see there's one small green and red fleck in it.
I don't see it. I see the green.
See the green fleck running through it?
Yeah.
It's actually, that fleck is actually red and green twisted together. It's actually two strands, one red and one green twisted together with that fleck pattern. You can't see it because the line itself is red.
Right.
These are just basically good for sheets of various.
Well, like I say, they're very popular. They're what you can find most easily, but I personally don't much like them for sheets because it's slick. It's hard to grip. You grab it and pull on it and it slides out of your hand.
And
so
that's
I don't much like Stay Set or XLS for sheets. I'll use it for small control lines. I'll use the 3/16 for barber haulers and out hauls and such.
That's not so important on a big boat because you're using winches.
Couldn't hear that.
Right.
I said that's not so important on a big boat because you're using winches to control your lines.
So the big boats, it's okay that they're a little bit slippery because they use the winches to bring the lines in.
Right. And more important for a big boat is that Stay Set is fairly firm. It stays round. When you put it under load, it doesn't get really flat. And that's good for wrapping on a winch.
Price-wise, are they more expensive because they're the name brands?
Well, the name brands will be more expensive than off brands. Hang on just a moment. I'm going to walk across the room and pick up a few samples from other brands. This is something similar. This is called ULS Yacht Braid. It's made by Yale. It's basically the same thing. Basically an equivalent to Stay Set or XLS.
In that it's polyester.
It's a polyester double braid. Fairly slick. This is more Stay Set. You can tell by the fleck pattern. See the two big red ones and the little red one. This, I don't know what manufacturer made this. You see their fleck pattern is just the two colored flecks and no red tracer. And this eyesore, this was made by Valley Rope and sort of their trademark. It's really hard to see here. It's a rainbow colored flex.
Right, we see yellow,
so
red,
there's a yellow
blue.
fleck, a red fleck, a blue fleck, and a black fleck or something like that. I've generally found Valley Rope to be pretty good quality as a manufacturer for most of what I've gotten from them, and much less expensive.
What makes
although they're not a name brand.
What makes for poor quality rope?
I don't know that I have any examples here.
Right, but you verbally said Valley Rope tends to be good quality. So what do you have in mind for comparisons as in terms of what you've gotten that was bad?
Well, I think the Valley Rope is every bit, this line from Valley Rope I think is every bit as good as the equivalent from New England Rope or Samson. in terms of what I can tell for the quality of construction and materials and how it feels and stiffness and everything else. And from my limited use of it, it appears to be of equal quality, but it costs half as much. So I've bought several spools of this stuff. So I have it in orange and blue and white and maybe something else too.
What diameter?
I don't recall if this is sold as 1/4 inch or 3/16. Remember I said that the manufacturers aren't very consistent with their sizing. Compare that to this one. And to this one.
Those are supposedly all the same diameters?
This is 1/4 inch, and this is 3/16.
Okay.
And this is somewhere in between. And I don't remember whether this orange rope was labeled as 3/16 or 1/4. I just don't remember. This is 1/4 inch stay set. This is the valley rope.
You probably want to do about 3/16 for most smaller control lines.
Let me, I think you must all be getting pretty, where is my cursor? And a lot of that is a matter of preference. Because for most of the control lines that we use, what they're made of and how much stretch they have really isn't very important. It may be important for a halyard, for example. If you're going to hoist your sail and then put a multi-purchase downhaul on it and haul down on it 200-300 pounds, then yeah, you might worry about the line stretching. But if it's anything, or if it's a main sheet on a big boat or a jib sheet on a big boat where you've got a 8-to-1 purchase on your main sheet or a cascaded purchase on your main sheet or a winch on your jib sheet, you're going to be putting a lot of tension on it. So you might worry about stretch. But for any hand tensioned line on a dinghy, you're not going to be putting more than 50 pounds of pull on it. I don't think any of us would ever want to pull harder than 50 pounds on any control line. And most of the control lines are much less. You know, I know the outhaul on a Tanzer, I'm probably putting 10 pounds of pull on it. And none of these lines are going to stretch noticeably with that light a load. So you worry about sizing for two things. One is, how well is it going to run through the blocks and hold in the cleats that you have? Because if it's too small or too big, it won't run or won't cleat. And secondly is, how easy is it to pull on? I mean, I would hate to use a 3/16 inch diameter line for a main sheet because I just can't grip that small. For main sheets and jib sheets, I'm going to share my screen again. My personal preference on dinghies is 5/16 inch.
But main sheet is usually bigger than jib sheets.
On our Tanzer, we're using 5/16 for both, and on the Isotope, I'm using 5/16 for both. Although some people will use a larger line for the main sheet. Some people like 3/8. I find 3/8 to be too bulky. And I find 1/4 inch to just be too hard to hold when I really need to pull in on the main sheet. For the traveler line, I like 1/4 inch usually. It's just my own personal preference. Now, if Dave Birchfield were here, he would say, oh, he doesn't have any line bigger than 1/4 inch on his boat. And most of his are 3/16 or 1/8 inch. He's got a lot of strings and he likes pulling small diameters, and I don't have as many, and I don't like pulling on small diameters.
So Ray, what size is your main sheet?
My main sheet is tapered. I think the part that I grip is somewhere around 5 millimeters to 8 millimeters max. And then it tapers down where I'm not drawing it.
Right.
Well, 5/16 inch is roughly 8 millimeters.
Yeah, Scott's
1/4 inch
came
is a little
originally
over
10
6.
millimeter. Yeah. Scott's came with big blocks originally when they were cruising boats before we raced them. Big blocks and 10 millimeter soft single braid.
Yeah, it's easy to hold, but it's very bulky.
And it got wet and heavy very quickly. Now I use those lines for dock lines.
What lines do you want? For what lines do you want stretch? For any?
Well, let's dive briefly into what is stretch, shall we? And there are, let me see if I can find, if you look at the center column here, they're talking about elongation. And there are, I'll use the term elongation because there are different types of elongation, one of which is what we know of as what we call stretch. And what we refer to as stretch is elastic elongation. That means you pull on the rope, it gets longer, and when you release the load, it snaps back like a rubber band. It's elastic. Another form of elongation is what we call constructional elongation. And that is when you pull on the line, if it's a twisted line, it pulls a little longer and twists tighter. If it's a braided line, then the fibers shift a little bit and pull together, and it gets a little bit longer and a little smaller in diameter and a little stiffer. And that constructional stretch can either come direct from the fact that it might be woven a little bit on the loose side when spooled up, and the first time you use it and load it up, it will get a little longer and it will stay longer. But usually after you've loaded it up once, then that's pretty much it. Another type of permanent elongation or inelastic elongation is when the rope relaxes a little bit, it'll get a little shorter, and then when you pull on it again, it'll get a little bit longer. And when you stop using it, it'll relax and go back again. That's what they're calling hysteresis. And there's another nasty property that some lines have called creep. And that means when you load it up and leave it loaded for a while, it gets longer. And when you release the load, it stays longer. And you put it under load again, and it gets longer. And you release the load, and it stays longer. And over the life of the line, it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. And that's called creep. So if you look at the right-hand side of this chart, Jolene, you need me to turn the pointer on again?
Eric, before you leave creep, does that also suggest then that the line changes diameter as it elongates?
Not necessarily, because it's not, the fibers aren't realigning, they're just getting longer.
Thank you.
When a fiber creeps, you know, the molecules are just getting longer. And some lines are famous for creep and will creep a lot, and some lines are famously have very little or almost no creep. So if you look at this comparison of fiber characteristics chart on the right side of the screen, see they're comparing nylon, polyester, and polypropylene for how strong they are. That's what tenacity means. And the second group is the same information for HMPE, which we know better as Dyneema or Spectra, and LCP, which we know better as Vectran, and Aramid, which we know better as Kevlar, Twaron, or Technora.
Are those manufacturer names that you said?
Okay, so
Certainly
polyester,
Kevlar is.
if you look at the top, polyester is the generic name for the fiber. The trade name, the brand name is Dacron. For HMPE, that's the generic name, high modulus polyethylene. And the trade name is Dyneema or Spectra. Those are brand names. LCP is liquid crystal polymer, and its brand name is Vectran. And Aramid is a class of lines, and that has brand names of Kevlar or Twaron or Technora.
So Eric, I've heard of Kevlar, but have I heard of the other two?
Well, Kevlar is not the first aramid that was ever made, but it's certainly the most successful. It's used a lot for fireproof clothing, although you may have heard of Nomex. Nomex is another aramid, and that's normally used for fire retardant materials because it has a very high burning. It doesn't melt. It has a very high, extremely high melting point. It's really charring. But Kevlar is used a lot as a woven fiber material in the fiberglass industry. It's very cut resistant, so they make Kevlar gloves for people in the restaurant industry so they don't cut themselves. It's used in ropes. They make sailcloth out of Kevlar. If you see a big heel boat with golden colored sails, it has Kevlar fibers in it.
So do they combine carbon fiber and Kevlar fiber?
Yeah, you can get them. You can get a cloth made of mixed Kevlar and carbon.
So lightweight and very strong.
Well, the same thing was said of polyester when it first came out, because compared to cotton, it was lightweight and very strong and low stretch. But compared to polyester, Kevlar is lighter and stronger and has less stretch. You see the tenacity of polyester is 7 to 10, and that's a strength indicator. And aramid is 28, so it's much stronger. If you compare polyester's elongation rate, it's 12 to 18%. That means when you pull on polyester fibers, they will stretch by 12 to 18% before they break. And for Kevlar, that's only 4.6%. So it has a lot less stretch.
Do you have a Kevlar line handy to show?
So this is my old halyard off the isotope. And this line is a double braid composed of a polyester cover over a Kevlar core. Now, all the double braids I've talked about before, where the core and the cover were made of the same or very similar materials, where the core and the cover share the load, those are called traditional or class 1 double braids. There's a different kind of double braid where the core takes 90% or more of the load, and the cover is just there to protect the core. Well, it's to protect it and also to make it grippier. So you make the cover out of something like polyester, which is UV resistant, it's chafe resistant, it doesn't snag easily, and it's fairly grippy on winch drums. And then you make the core out of Kevlar, which is not as UV resistant. It is snaggy. It's much slicker, so it doesn't hold well on winch drums, but it's a lot stronger and has less stretch. You can see that where I attached this to the halyard shackle, the ring on the isotope, that those Kevlar fibers are really distorted and worn, and several of them are broken.
And you know
That's
why?
because while
Too,
Kevlar's a great
right?
line in many ways, Kevlar's downfall is that it doesn't like bending over a sharp radius.
Right. High modulus in one direction.
If you bend it over a sharp radius, the fibers will actually fracture. So that's why this is no longer on my boat. I retired this line because this was getting rather worn.
Eric, you want to show the splicing?
The taper?
Yeah.
Well, there's the crossover. That's where I did the core to cover splice. And then, as you can see, it tapers down.
As the core gets out of there. So
Yeah, what happens is
here-
at this point, this is the line as I bought it, the cover over the core. And right here is where I pulled the core out of the cover. And then I ran the cover and the core both through each other, right here. And then I buried the cover inside the core here for the appropriate length, and then it tapers down.
I thought you replaced the core in that line with a Kevlar core.
No, this one came from the factory with this
So-
cover and core combination.
So how expensive is that line?
This line is, see, it's only 4 millimeters, but it's about $1 a foot.
Which is expensive.
Yes, I consider $1 a foot expensive. This MFP line, this 5/16 MFP line, is 50 cents a foot. And if you go get 5/16 stay set from West Marine, it'll run probably 70 or 80 cents a foot.
Now, Eric hasn't actually shopped recently, so those prices could have jumped.
So what are
Although-
stretch lines good for?
What was that, Annette?
What are stretchy lines good for? Anything?
Stretchy lines, if you want something that's stretchy, then you're probably talking nylon.
But why would we want a
What
stretchy
for?
line on a sailboat?
Like I said, for anchor lines, you want something stretchy so that when your boat is drifting around at night you're on anchor and you reach the end of the line, you don't want the boat to jerk and pull the anchor out. You want that strain, you want the line to take up some of that strain. You'll get a much better sleep and you won't worry as much about jerking your anchor out of the bottom. Likewise for dock lines, it's nice when your boat is at the dock, sitting there, and it's moving around as the wind blows on it. You don't want it shock loading the cleats on the dock every time the wind shifts. So nylon lines, stretchy lines, what in climbing is called a dynamic line, you want something with a lot of stretch in it, and normally that would be nylon.
So,
Nylon was the first man-made fiber, and it's still one of the most popular and one of the strongest. But for things like halyards, or for shroud replacement, or cascaded control lines where, you know, like a line coming out of a magic box, a forestay tensioner, something like that, you do not want stretch. Because the last thing you want to do is to pull your magic box 6 inches and have the lines attached to stretch. So for those control lines,
Annette,
then
do
you
know
want...
what magic box is?
kind of. I know it has to do with like the multiplying effect of a
It's a
kind of thing.
it's a small rectangular metal block that has blocks at the top, blocks at the bottom, and inside multiple reeving of the line so that you get the
It's-
purchase.
A magic box is just a multi-part purchase inside a metal housing. I think some people put a magic box on a Wayfarer for the, is it for the forestay tension?
I don't know. I've seen it mentioned, but I didn't know what it really was for.
Dyneema.
But for that type of thing, if it's not something you're going to be pulling on by hand, but instead is something that you've got a multi-part purchase on, and you need high strength and low stretch, then you move to one of the fibers like Dyneema, which is bimodulus polyethylene. And this is very strong. It's very strong. It's very lightweight. It floats. This is a size for size direct replacement for steel wire.
Wow.
Wow.
And it isn't color fast. When Eric handles Dyneema, his hands come back the color of the Dyneema.
Well, that's not the fault of the line in general. That's the fault of, I bought this as a factory second. So I bought a box full of spools of 1/8" Dyneema line, and I got it at a ridiculously low price because it was a factory second, whereas one where the color coding, especially on the blue, didn't hold very well. So if you went out and you bought brand new Samson Amsteel blue, all of these colors, they're all called Amsteel blue. I don't know why they named a type of fiber after a color. Amsteel blue comes in a variety of colors. If you bought it brand new, it probably wouldn't have as bad a discoloration problem. But I got this cheap because it was either the beginning or end of a production run where they didn't have the manufacturing process down quite right for that production run, and the coating isn't particularly color fast.
So how expensive is Dyneema?
Well, it can be as expensive as you want. You can buy just the Dyneema single braids like these, probably for 1/8" is probably going to run you somewhere between 50 and 70 cents a foot. You can get smaller diameters and bigger diameters, and the bigger diameters can get really expensive. They can be several dollars a foot for the larger diameters. There are some specialty braids. Let me see if you can. This is made by FSC Robline. It's called Dyneema Polytech. Now, this is kind of strange line. This is the same manufacturer and the same type of line. They're both Robline Dyneema Polytech. They're just supposed to be different diameters. But if you look at them, you'll see the covers are very different.
Mm-hmm.
This is 3.5 millimeter, just over 1/8 inch. And this is 5 millimeter, just about 3/16 of an inch. And I bought these because they were advertised as easy to splice. And the cover is a combination of polyester and Technora.
Okay. Is Technora the dark green?
Technora is the black.
Okay.
And the polyester is the green. And the core is Technora. Which is an aramid, a lot like Kevlar. So this would be a very high strength, low stretch control line, even though it's only an 1/8 inch in diameter. And I think this cover is loose enough that I could splice that pretty easily. The 3/16 version of it, however, I mean, look at that cover. It is a really, really tight braid. The fibers in it are much smaller and they're braided really firmly together. And I have done it's the same materials, polyester and Technora.
You don't want to take that one apart, Eric.
This is what I'm currently using for the main halyard. See, I can't even push that needle through easily. This is what I'm currently using for the halyard on my isotope. But it took me all day to do that splice, to do that core to cover splice, because I simply could not separate these little tiny polyester fibers far enough apart to pull the core out and to push it back through to do the Brummel. But I bought these spools on a clearance sale. So the small stuff is 75 cents a foot, and this 3/16 is $1 a foot.
I think you had said that Dyneema is hard to make knots in or doesn't hold knots well. How about cleats? Does it come out of cleats easily?
Okay, if we're talking about Dyneema, we need to talk about single braid Dyneema, which is normally in the form of what's called a hollow braid. That is, you can push it apart, push it together, and it opens up quite a bit. It's actually hollow on the inside at that point. It's great. It's not tremendously expensive. It's extremely high strength. It's extremely low stretch. It's extremely lightweight, but two problems. One is it's very slick. So if you try to pull on anything that's made out of Dyneema, you won't be able to grip it. It'll just slide out of your hand. for the same reason it does not hold well in cleats, and it does not hold knots well. There's only one knot I've found that holds reliably in Dyneema, in Samson Amsteel Blue, because that's what I tested it with. I spent some time a while back tying a bunch of knots in this stuff and loading it up on a winch and pulling it until the line broke and seeing if the knots held. And there's only one knot I ever found that was consistently held, and that was the angler's loop.
The what?
Angler's loop. But it's dirt easy to splice. This is the easiest splicing stuff I've ever found. So Dyneema was not meant to be knotted. It was meant to be spliced. Now, Samson, this is made by Samson, Amsteel Blue. Samson also makes a line called Amsteel 1 and Amsteel 2, which are a double braid. They're an Amsteel core with a polyester cover. And those you never, ever want to tie a knot in. The problem is the knot will hold in the cover, but it won't hold in the core. So when you load it up, the core will simply slip and the cover will hold. So if you've got a high strength line where all the tension is being taken by the core, if the core slips, then all of that tension gets transferred to the cover. And the cover is not nearly as strong. So if you tie a knot in Amsteel 1 or Amsteel 2, it'll break. The cover will rupture at 10, 20% of the line's rated strength. So remember that Amsteel is not made for holding or for knotting, it's made for splicing. The other downside of Dyneema is it creeps. Remember I talked about creep and how some lines creep and some lines don't. Well, Dyneema creeps horribly. Several years ago, I made myself a jib for the isotope, and instead of putting a steel wire in the forestay, I used 1/8" Amsteel Blue. And over the course of the life of that jib, I respliced that line 4 or 5 times because it just kept getting longer and longer and longer. I mean, the forestay on an isotope is only about 20 feet long. And I must have taken a good 18 inches out of that line over time, just from it creeping and getting longer.
So that was an experiment that failed.
Well, actually, I bought a spool. I don't have it here with me. I bought a spool of Vectran to try to use instead, because Vectran is almost as strong as Dyneema, just as low stretch as Dyneema, and it doesn't creep. So I was going to try to make one out of Vectran, but in the end, I just went back to steel wire.
So Eric, based on a time check, do you want to talk about where to buy line from? I know you've referenced a few.
Well, the easiest place to buy line from is West Marine, of course. But they have a rather poor selection.
Limited selection.
Well, very limited. You can order more lines online from them than you can get in the store. They carry some stuff by Marlowe. This is Marlowe braid. I don't know where you can get this in the US, but you can get this line, which is Marlowe Excel Pro, which is their small control line in a variety of colors. I think you can get it from West Marine.
So Marlowe is the manufacturer?
Marlowe's the manufacturer. There's some big names. Okay, we've talked about New England. New England Ropes is a big name. Samson Ropes is a big name. Yale is a big name. Marlowe is a big name, but Marlowe is an English company. a British company, so it's not easy to get in the US. There aren't many distributors in the US. There are some others. Let me see if I can find my list. Robline. There's another company called Rooster, and Collegio and Maffioli. I mentioned Maffioli. They made the Swift cord, green stuff. I talked about Valley Rope, which is not a big name. They're they're basically a no-name company making inexpensive knockoffs of the brand names. The only place I've ever found Valley Rope brand is on eBay. There used to be a guy selling New England ropes on eBay at a discount. I haven't seen him lately. Most of the Rob line that I've bought off eBay. Although if you buy line from Ronstan, it will probably be Rob line brand. Rob line and New England are both owned by the same parent company, so you're starting to see some crossover in what they have in their brand lineup. But some other options are Defender Marine, which is an online place. Defender.com, I think it is. Vila Sailing Supply is another place you can buy line from.
So Eric,
Seattle Marine is a place that sometimes has line at a lower price.
Eric, how often have you bought line and then what you received was not at all what was advertised?
I've gotten a lot of line that I was very disappointed with. I don't know that I've gotten a lot that wasn't as advertised. You have to watch out. You really need to, it helps to be able to see what you're getting before you go buy something, if possible, if you don't know what it is. For example, here's a spool that I just bought off of eBay several years ago. It was advertised as a double braid polyester, and it was a good price, and it was from a company that I'd bought stuff from before. But let me see if I can clear off some white space here. See how far away I'm holding this. That's how stiff that line is. You know, it's not, I'm holding it horizontal from about 2 feet away. You wouldn't want to use this on a boat. It's so stiff, it won't want to run through a block.
So Annette, how stiff is your, was it your spinnaker line you showed me?
Yeah, the spinnaker halyard.
So Eric, show her how you bent that line and for a measure of stiffness.
I'm starting to pull pretty hard on that, and you can see it's holding its shape.
It's definitely not that stiff.
Okay.
This is pretty stiff. If you compare that to, that was 1/4 inch. Where did I put my 1/4 inch stay set? I'm not seeing it, but I'll hold this stuff. This is really flexible.
Mm-hmm.
So something like Stay Set or XLS or ULS from Yale, they'll all be very flexible. And so will Trophy Braid or Swift Cord. Where'd my buzz line run off to? The buzz line is a little stiffer. It's a harder braid, so it doesn't want to bend as much.
So Eric, do you have the tub handy that you told me I wasn't allowed to touch?
Which tub was that?
I don't know. There were 3 tubs in the car and you said, of this tub, do not touch.
I think that's still in the car. This is the Marlowe Excel Pro. It's it's made for control lines. It's a little bit stiffer, but it's very round. It's a little bit stiffer, so it'll hold in small cleats well. I've jumbled this stuff around pretty good. Oh, here it is. This is something I generally carry with me. It's just a bundle of small control lines. Most of these are the same. These are all the same material. They're a polyester double braid 4mm, which is just a little bit over 1/8 inch in diameter. I find this makes for a nice control line, and it comes in a variety of colors. And I have at least 100 feet of each of these. Some of these I have spools of, just so every little string on my boat can be a different color. And this is more of that dinghy control line. Well, actually, this is something different. This one's a little different. This one has a Dyneema core. I don't know if I have more of this. I should have a spool of this.
And that's just a 2-foot long piece of different pieces you just have bundled together?
These are just samples that I take around with me to show people. So if they say, hey, I just need, you know, I want to color code my twing lines. You know, what can I use for twing lines? And I'll pull this out and say, okay, here's all the different colors I have. On the isotope, I have lines that pull the rudders up and lines that pull the rudders down. So I use this on it. The one with the blue fleck I use to pull the rudders down into the water, and the ones with the maroon fleck I use to pull the rudders up out of the water. Other than that, they never take much load. They just either hold the rudder up or pull it down. This is a specialty line that I got to try out and never used. It's made specifically for continuous control lines.
Such
Double
as?
braid where the cover bears the load and the core is just filler to give it bulk. So you can splice a continuous control line out of it of a continuous diameter. So the diameter, it doesn't get wider at the splice.
For example?
Well, we don't have any continuous control lines on our boats. You and I don't. Dave Birchfield does. For example, he has a downhaul that is a continuous control line. It runs all around his boat, so he can, to both sides. So from either side, he can pull it as hard as he wants or let it out all the way, regardless of how much it's been pulled up on the other side. Because if he pulls it up really tight on one side, well, it's continuous. He can just pull that length out on the other.
So what does it mean that it's red on part of it and blue on the other part of it?
These are two different lines coiled together.
Okay.
One of them is red and black, the other is blue and black.
Some furling drums are continuous lines.
Right.
What did he say,
Some
Eric?
furling drums are that way. Some furling drums, it's not like the isotope furling drum where the line spools up. It's just one line that runs around a drum and rotates it. And you pull on it in one direction and it furls up, and you pull on it in the other direction and it unfurls. And those are typically a continuous loop.
I'm out with my jib sheets.
I usually tie my jib sheets to the jib clue in the center of the line and then reeve them and tie them together. You see, I'm partial on my jib sheets to having them color-coded, starboard and port. So these are my isotope jib sheets, where I have Record Samson trophy braid. Have I mentioned tonight that I really like Samson trophy braid?
No.
I did last time. This stuff is trophy braid. It's a double braid polyester. Let me take this one out. This is a double braid polyester, and the cover is made out of spun polyester. So it's a little bit fuzzy. It's very similar in strength characteristics to New England Stay Set. It's a little bit stretchier. So it's a kind of old-fashioned. This was what they made to put on cruising boats where people didn't care about it being as low a stretch, but wanted something that was easy on the hands. So remember, the problem I said with Stay Set is it's slick, makes it harder to grip. Well, trophy braid is nice and fuzzy, and it's easy to grip. So what I really like about Samson trophy braid is the cover has what's called a nice hand. So for main sheets and jib sheets, this is my personal favorite.
And the flex pattern is Samson's markings?
Remember, I said it's difficult to see here, but there's a tracer that runs through it that is red and green.
Correct.
So there's no fleck pattern in this line.
The bigger marks are flex and the skinny marks a tracer?
Yes. If it's just one strand running through it, that's called a tracer. If it's a multiple strands to make part of the diamond shape pattern, then that's called flex. Now,
So,
like I said, trophy braid, people poo-poo it because Stay Set and XLS have lower stretch than trophy braid. But again, if it's anything that's hand tensioned, you're not getting anywhere near the amount of load it takes to stretch the line.
for a dinghy, so more important on a big
Dinghy.
boat.
If it was a offshore racing boat, I would not use Stay Set on it. I'd use some higher tech material. But for our purposes, feeling good in the hand is much more important to me than 1 or 2% of stretch.
You said you wouldn't use Stay Set, but did you mean to say you wouldn't use
I meant
trophy
to
braid?
say, I meant to say trophy braid. Well, I wouldn't
Okay.
use Stay Set either.
Right. So,
But
Annette,
one of the problems with polyester, and particularly spun polyester, is it absorbs water. So when it gets wet, it holds the water in and it gets heavy. So on light air days, if you drop your jib sheets in the water or your spinnaker sheets in the water and they're made out of polyester, they're going to get heavier. Now, is that going to cost you a race? Probably not. But that was why when I made my jib sheets for the Isotope, I record the trophy braid with 4mm Samson Amsteel Blue. So this is the portion that hangs from the jib clew, and it's Dyneema. And it doesn't tie on, it loops on, so there's no knot there. This just goes through the...
yeah, but that's what your Halyard did, and your Halyard Kevlar still busted up.
Well, Dyneema is much more forgiving about going around a small radius.
Okay.
HMPE does not fracture like the Aramids do. So you see, I've been using this for longer, and it still looks in good shape. But the portion that I have flying from the jib is this very lightweight Dyneema, and the portion that I hold on to is this really nice, soft, fuzzy, easy diameter to grip trophy braid. In the end, though, this gets pretty expensive because you're paying 70 cents a foot for the trophy braid and about as much for the Dyneema. So this stuff turned out to be about $1.50 a foot by the time I was done.
Yeah, but we only needed 20, 25 feet of it.
I think this was about 30 feet of line all told, 15 feet per side.
So Annette, how does that do towards the questions you were having?
That was great. That clarified a lot.
And this is a soft shackle that I use on the downhaul of my isotope that I just pulled out because I think it's a pretty vivid demonstration of when you should replace a line.
I think you waited too long, Eric.
Well, this shows a number of issues of just wear and places where the strands have broken, have chafed. If you look at the center, see if I can zoom in a little more. Right here, you see it's a little discolored and flattened. See how much thicker the fiber, wider the fibers are here than they are here.
Mm-hmm.
You look at it sideways, you can see that the line has been flattened there. And especially in Dyneema, if it starts to get flat and shiny, that's a sign that you should replace it. Anytime it gets discolored, those are all signs. Now, actually, there's still, because this is a soft shackle and this is actually one line inside another, you know, there's, even though it's worn through the outside here, there really is still a lot of strength left there. So I'm not really concerned about this breaking. But compare that to what a new one looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just time to...
It's an embarrassment.
To retire it. Okay, I've talked about a lot of stuff, and I don't know if it's really been helpful or not.
Definitely has for me.
Here's one that I didn't show.
Tiny.
Ah.
We use that to tie plugs to the boats with a lanyard so we don't lose our plug.
This was one of the last purchases I made from APS when out of the cordage business. APS used to be a great buy line, but they don't sell it anymore. This is actually a double braid with a Dyneema core. I mean, compare this diameter to the 1/8" diameter. So this is a 3mm line, and this tiny stuff is what, about 1mm?
So what would you use the tiny
and
stuff
it's a
for?
double braid. You look at that. You can see there's actually a Dyneema core inside this.
What would you use that for, Eric?
Well, this line is sold for use as sail ties for tying specifically sunfish.
You cut out, say it again.
It's advertised to use for tying a sunfish sail to the spars, or a laser sail. No, a laser sail you loop. Never mind the laser sail. Sunfish sail is what they sell it for. Why you need a low stretch Dyneema line for tying a sail to a spar on a sunfish, I don't know. But what I would use this for is for tying battens into batten pockets, or as a tether for a drain plug.
Yeah, you don't need extra strong low stretch for either of those two things. You just need tiny.
You just need tiny. And this is a small, high quality, very small diameter line.
Could you use it for a traveler?
Why in the world would you want to do that?
Because it's small.
It's so small you can't hold it or put it in a cleat.
No, for a traveler.
Yeah, for a traveler.
Traveler on the back of an aquafin. I just need
I
a
would-
line on the back of the boat that has a bite in it that I can tie the main sheet to.
Well, you should talk to Clint and have them repair the line that they have agreed
I'm
to.
not talking about city boats.
Well, who else do you know who owns an aquafin?
Busted.
No, I would not use that as the traveler line on an aquafin. If I had to use something, I would find some of the cheapest 3/16 inch line I could find, or even 4mm accessory cord. You know, I'd use something like this, or like that.
How about that stuff that didn't bend? The blue stuff that didn't bend.
No, you wouldn't want to use that.
It's been great.
Right?
I'm going to have to
Or-
leave.
Or this stuff.
Yep.
We've run on quite long already.
Yep.
So,
Before we leave,
questions?
does anybody have any specific questions or want more clarification on anything? Or did this session cover things well enough that now everybody is confused differently?
I think it was a very good clarity. Stephen, it'll be posted on the Lake Townsend site so you can get the beginning of it, because the beginning of it was a nice intro as well.
thanks very much.
Well, before we leave, let's talk sheave diameter.
Well,
That
and that's
is,
to go.
what size block do you need to run a particular line through? Now, if you look at the back of, if you go buy a block, a Harkin block, and look at the back, it'll say what line size it's for. But that's really not what's recommended. For most braided ropes, you want a sheave size where the diameter of the sheave is 8 times the diameter of the rope you're running through it for braided ropes. Remember I said that aramid, that Kevlar doesn't like to go around corners? If you're running Kevlar through a block, then you want the sheave diameter to be 20 times the diameter of the Kevlar line. If you're running 7x19 wire rope through a block, then you want the sheave diameter to be 24 times the diameter of the wire rope.
Where is this information available?
Well, I think you can find that on this. That's melting points. There it is. Sheave recommendations. They don't talk about Kevlar or wire rope, but
What about standard double braid?
a standard double braid would be 8 times.
8 times, okay.
So if you're using 1/8 inch line, you would want a block with a 1 inch diameter sheave or larger. If you're using 1/4 inch line, then you would want a 2 inch sheave.
Where'd you get this publication from? Is this something you can post or?
I got this off the Samson website. I can post a link to it.
Yeah, just great.
No, this is just Samson's. Every manufacturer has something similar published. And this one I just thought was pretty good and has a lot of useful information in it for.
And he'll make the link
inspections and-
available. He'll make the link available when they post as well. All right, guys, let's wrap her up.
Okay, for the 2 of you who are left, have a nice night.
No, there are more than two.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Eric.
And if you
always
have suggestions for
Bye for
future
now.
topics, please send them in.
Somebody was saying something. Who was that?
Oh, that was Jason. I just said thanks for the explanation. It's always enjoyable to listen.
Thank you, Jason.
Learned a lot. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn in sailing.
And if anybody is at the lake and needs line, I usually have lots of line with me. And I usually buy it by the spool. I didn't say it before as to where to buy stuff from. But I generally, whenever I see a really good deal online, I buy a spool of it. So if it's something I have, I can sell it to you for less than what you can buy it for online.